Have you ever intentionally allowed yourself to make mistakes? For those of us who are in journey groups, you may recognize that as question 6 in this month's New Horizons materials on the theme of intention. Have you ever intentionally allowed yourself to make mistakes? On this past Wednesday night, I facilitated the journey group comprised of our journey group facilitators. Our practice is to meet early in the month to go through the same materials that the other journey groups in the congregation use in the weeks to follow. We spent a fair bit of our time together on Wednesday circling around this question: have you ever intentionally allowed yourself to make mistakes? Now, there are different ways to come at it. Do you give yourself, in a general way, permission to make mistakes, or at least from time to time? Or have you, while you are fully aware you're making a mistake, allowed yourself to just keep at it, just keep going, come what may? How we answer this question speaks, I believe, to our capacity to contend with change, at least the kind that is to some degree within our control. It speaks to our willingness to take some risk, to realize that you have to venture something you may very well lose, to accept that life is shot through with uncertainty, and that grasping for reassurance or clinging to stability may put you in greater peril than simply going with the flow and riding out the waves of chance and change. Change, of course, can be the bringer of good things or bad, or a complicated mix of both that can take a very long time to sort out. So with that as our reality, how then are we to live? How are we supposed to know when to act and when to hold back, take our time and read our tea leaves or our horoscope or anything that might give us an ounce more confidence about what we are doing? My late colleague Forrest Church said we should adopt the 60% solution in these matters. By this, he meant that when faced with a daunting decision, you take the leap if your feelings of conviction reach 60%. Once you reckon, he says, that the odds for things turning out well outweigh the odds for their turning out badly, on a 60-40 decision, you go for it, remaining mindful that you may be making a mistake. That means that accounting for basic judgment and your good fortune, if you routinely act on 60% convictions, then 60% of your decisions will turn out pretty well. As for the other 40%, he says, you can either write them off as the cost of doing business, or, a spiritually finer approach, add them to your balance of humility. The danger in demanding a high threshold for certainty is that you may well miss out on opportunities that matter. Life can become very small when we insist on certainty before we make a move, before we commit, before we get involved. This came home to me last Monday when I was trying to decide whether and how to respond to the standoff between the RCMP and the Wet'suwet'en First Nation over whether the Trans-Canada Pipeline will be allowed to cross over their traditional lands. On Monday night, as Lynn and I were corresponding our thoughts about this issue, I knew I didn't nearly know enough about, and as much as I wanted to know. I didn't adequately understand the status of negotiations between TransCanada and the Indigenous peoples who live along the intended path of the pipeline. And I didn't fully comprehend the power dynamics between the elected band council and the hereditary elders. But while I have learned a lot this week since then, I showed up with Lynn and folks from our congregation at Nathan Phillips Square because I wanted to show my solidarity. I wanted to register my deep concern that the actions of the RCMP were at odds with the delicate work of reconciliation. Reconciliation takes time and it requires deep listening, and I wasn't convinced that there had been enough of either. I rarely believe the use of force to be helpful, but I believe this is especially true at this moment in our history. Force is often a sign of weakness, an indication that the relationship is breaking down. And this week it has damaged our best efforts toward reconciliation between nations and denied the best of who we aspire to be. On Tuesday morning, though, when deciding what to do, I relied on the 60% solution. My anger over the use of force was easily enough got me to 60%, even though there were uncomfortable gaps in my understanding. Have you ever intentionally allowed yourself to make mistakes? Yes, I have. And I'm glad I did and do. I actually find I'm getting better at it with age. For the record, I don't believe this was a mistake, but I realize it could have been. I've thought about this as we launch this series of services on change, because I wonder often about our congregation's capacity for change. I wonder how prepared we are to manage the stress of moving to a new home, to handle the disruption that comes with any move. And I wonder about our appetite for taking risks and making mistakes. In terms of our real estate efforts, I believe we have taken tremendous amount of care to gather as much information as possible and to then make the wisest decisions we can given the limits of what we can know. I am deeply grateful for and tremendously proud of how you as a congregation have repeatedly demonstrated such resolve and ongoing dedication. Few congregations would have the courage to sell their home without knowing exactly where they're headed. Few congregations would have managed the anxiety of this process with such grace and compassion. That we have been able to do this is a testament to our refusing to be led by our fears. Instead, we've gone for the bold embrace of the dawning future we trust is still unfolding. And we've made real our belief that we, led by hope and by love, can help to bring it into being. By my calculation, I would say that we're operating with something much higher than a 60% solution. But this decision has still required of us a great leap of faith. Several years ago now, I shared with you the image of the roller coaster of change. I distributed copies that day in your orders of service. I encourage you to go home and stick them on your refrigerator or tape them to your bathroom mirror. For years now, there's been a copy stuck to my door in my office. The roller coaster goes up and down like any other, but it depicts the many complicated stages of change, with the range of emotions we go through as we move from shock and anger, through grief and acceptance, to hope and excitement. On this, our slowest roller coaster ride in the world, many of us have been through all the cycles over and over as we've made one trip after another around the tracks. My hope is that you are learning to love the ride, that you're coming to embrace the adventure even though we don't know when and where this particular ride will come to an end. To be sure, there is a big part of me that very much looks forward to the day when we are settled in our new building. I can't wait to have a home for us that is fully accessible to everyone and functioning in ways that best support the life of this active congregation. I long for the day that we put down deep roots and devote ourselves anew to the flourishing of this wonderful city. But if I am completely honest, part of me will also miss the ride when we pull into the station and the safety bars pop up. It's because I know that the journey is the destination, that the ride on life's roller coaster is what it's really all about. But the truth is that life is all roller coasters, here, there, and everywhere. And the choice, as always, is whether we will have the will and the courage to ride. In just over 2 years, we will move from this place. To be perfectly frank, this is one of the most challenging things a congregation can live through. I have absolute confidence, though, that we are going to do so with our usual grace and good humor. And I say that because I have already seen how resilient this congregation can be. There is, in all of this, though, the question of how we will spend these next 2 years. Obviously, there is a ton of work to be done. We need to find a new location, design a new building, plan the move, and buy tons of boxes and packing tape. The conventional wisdom says that with all of that going on, a congregation should do what it can to minimize any additional stress and strain. But I tell you today that I think that guidance is guidance we must resist. There's just too much to be done at this complicated moment in time for us to rest on our laurels and wait to move into a brand new home. Instead, I believe we also need to dedicate time and energy over the next 2 years to becoming who we long to be when we move into that new building. If our goal is to truly increase the sum total of love and justice in our world, this isn't work we can set aside for a more convenient time. I hear the call for us to deepen our resolve. I hear the call for us to stretch and grow. I hear the call for us to take risks and to make glorious mistakes. For the work of reconciliation is on our doorstep. The need for racial justice in our city is growing. Transgender people live among and around us in fear for their very lives and their well-being. And climate change confronts us at every turn. We live in complex and concerning times, but we also live in an era of great promise. A moment out of the vastness of time when we are called to harness the powers of the human heart and spend them in service to the flourishing of justice and peace on this planet. We don't have to do it all, and of course we can't. Each of us can only do so much. But we are called to play our part, no matter how small, to help heal our own corner of the world, be that through bold, grand gestures, or in small and steady acts of love and kindness that touch and transform people's hearts. Over the next 2 years, as we live in what might be called the meantime, I long to see us helping to heal the world, starting where such work always and truly begins, with ourselves and with our own hearts. I'm going to ask us all to dig deeper, to deepen the spiritual practices that sustain you, to deepen your awareness of how identity and privilege can impede the cause of justice and peace, to deepen your resolve to build up the beloved community here and now as a moral imperative, and to take what you learn about yourself in this place, in this little loving laboratory of the human spirit, to help build a better world beyond our walls. The DNA of this strange and beautiful faith of ours has the potential to speak in powerful ways to the times in which we live. I will readily confess that your ministerial and staff team can only do so much. Our voices can only carry so far. But this community, equipped and emboldened to live out its values in the world, well, that is a different and far more compelling story. That is the story of a people who can make a genuine difference in the world. As I said a moment ago, conventional wisdom says that as a congregation in transition, this is a time to play it safe. But I resist that with every fiber of my being, and I hope you will too. The writer Anne Lamott writes, "I know the truth that I am not going to live forever, and this has set me free. 11 years ago, when my friend Pammy was dying at the age of 37, we went shopping. She was in a wheelchair with a wig and 3 weeks to live. I tried on a short dress and I came out to model it for her. I asked if she thought it made me look big in the thighs. And she said so kindly, 'Annie, you just don't have that kind of time.'" Lamott closes by saying, "I live by this story. And so, my dearly beloveds, must we. Change is upon us as it always is, so let us cherish the ride for as long as it lasts."